Welcome to Home's Room. Just like Homeroom, we start off our day getting together with our homies, swapping stories, even a little kiss and tell action. This podcast contains language not suitable for younger listeners, topics about sex and mental health. Discretion is advised. Our views are our own. Let class begin. Welcome to Home's Room. I'm joined by another guest this time. With us today, a podcaster, a lady who lives authentically by her own rules and spreads that message on Shamelessly, Unapologetic. Ilana Pinsky, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Ilana. I have been in the content creation space since 2017. I currently live in Portland, but when I first got started being a content creator, I was living in San Francisco. So I first started off with my YouTube channel, which is still very much active to this day. And then it wasn't until towards the end of 2020 where I decided I wanted to start a podcast because I felt like there was so much more that I wanted to talk about regarding just my life that felt like it wouldn't make sense to talk about on my YouTube channel. So that's when I decided to launch Shamelessly Unapologetic, which is what Matt introduced you just a second ago. So my whole podcast is about, well, it's funny. I ended up starting my podcast as a way to unapologetically vent about how people had done me wrong in my life. I had all these stories that I wanted to share and tell my truth and my feelings. And I was going to do it unapologetically. I wasn't going to give a shit about what people were going to think. And then it sort of just evolved from there. I ended up getting guests onto my show where people would have some sort of message that made them very unapologetic about something. So after my first year, I kind of transitioned a little bit more with my guests where I wanted to focus more on things that they were unapologetic about. And then focusing more on how, in terms of my solo episodes, on how I wanted to share a message on how others can be authentic and live their most unapologetic life. And so they can be bold about it and not give a fuck and to take back their power. So that's kind of the premises of my podcast. And I've been doing that for almost 3 years now. It's wild that it'll be 3 years in November. It feels like I just started yesterday. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here once again.
Yeah. So I don't know if I started following you right as you were launching that, but to think that it's been 3 years just from this side of the, the podcast is has it really been that? That's crazy. But looking at how I knowing how many episodes you have, yeah, that's impressive. So congratulations. I heard the other day that most podcasts don't make it past episode 21.
Really?
So yeah, that's to
Where
me
did
is
you hear that from? That's interesting.
it was a reel on Instagram. I can't remember who it was that shared it, but they were interviewing him about podcasts and he was sharing some stats. I think I have it still saved. I will send it to you so you can hear it because I was like, huh, okay. But you talked about doing guests and the Hannah Jennings episode. I reached out, I had commented about, I don't know if I messaged you or commented, but I just remember that was a really good episode. I loved what she had to say. It was super fun. You did a really good job interviewing. And I was just curious, as a podcaster, how do you decide what a good episode looks like? Even if it's not necessarily your podcast, just in general, what does a good podcast episode look like?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I'm really glad that you liked Hannah's episode. Yeah, Hannah was really awesome to talk to, hearing more about her story. I think for me, a good episode is one. So, it depends. Are you talking about just an episode, in general, whether it's a guest or a solo episode? Or are you talking about a guest episode specifically, just to get some clarity?
Just in general, because since you do both, it's easier to answer a general question than the specifics of either or, because I'm sure that's harder.
Sure. Yeah. So I think for me, what comes down to having a good episode is having structure. So when I first started my podcast, my solo episodes were really all over the place. And I mean, I was still always making a script, but I felt like my main episodes within my first year didn't really have a lot of takeaways or any like tangible advice that people could implement in their day-to-day life. I felt like my guest episodes were a lot better for that, but it's like I should be consistent here. Like my guest episodes, or not my guest episodes, my solo episodes should also have the same format. So I think for me, it's something that people can actually take away and that they're actually like gaining information. There's tangible and actionable advice that they can use in everyday life to help them. And also, I think, seeing like the analytics and the feedback, of course, also determines like success in terms of like listenership. And of course, the average listener duration, that definitely plays a role into that. But for me, if we're not talking about vanity metrics, I think it's something that people are going to learn from, and hearing that feedback, that qualitative feedback, that people really resonated with this. People learned or they took something away from this, and it's helped them in their day-to-day life. Like you told me that you loved the Hannah Jennings episode. What was it about that you loved?
Um, so for me, it was somebody like I know a little bit about the CrossFit Games, and that has transitioned from just a style of working out to like a full blown like sport and culture, and I've seen both extremes of it. And for me, listening to a story from somebody that's doing it, but that's finding success and motivating others, that was like not what I was expecting. Like obviously they're going to find ways to motivate themselves, but to find, enough meat on the bone of that topic to like motivate others so well. And like I said, it was just fun. Like the conversation, like I would assume that you guys have been friends forever, just simply because of how calm and, relaxed the conversation was, but how much fun it seemed like you were both having.
Yeah, well, it's funny. No, I like just met her this year, and that's like kind of what I like about my guest episodes, is that it kind of does feel that way, where it's like I've known these people forever, even though I've just recently met them. This is literally like my first time speaking with them, and I think when you have a successful guest episode, it comes down to the chemistry that you have. I've had one or two guests that don't really talk a lot, and I need guests who are going to bring the energy. And I know some people have more to say than others, and that's okay. But I think it's like you can tell when there's not enough chemistry between the guest and the host. And people can sense that, okay, this feels really awkward. I feel like the host is really trying to push the guest, really trying to connect with the guest, but the guest isn't really budging. And that really reads throughout the episode. I'm not going to say what episodes I've had in the past that were like that, just for the respect of those people. But yeah, it's like that's exactly what I love hearing, is that it's like, oh, it seems like you've known this person forever and you were able to have this comfortable, easy conversation. But it's like, no, I typically have never met these people in my life. Well, I mean, there have been a couple people that I know, like when I had Jen Davis on my show. She goes by Jen Lauren. She has her own podcast, and YouTube channel, and I've been connected with her for years now because we met at a YouTube boot camp together. That's how we got connected, and so I knew that I wanted her on my show because I knew she'd be really beneficial for my show, and just sharing more people about like how to really practice self-care, because that's her whole brand and what it's about. So that's really awesome to hear that you were able to like really think about things differently that you would have never thought of before. And I find that to be successful when I hear feedback like that as well, especially when it is a guest episode, because I feel like more people like my solo episodes than my guest episodes. But at the same time, I don't want to be just a solo episode podcast. I do want people to come on my show and share what they have to say, because I feel like those messages are equally important.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you just said, and you touched on some of the next questions I got in line. And I should have said this off the jump, but I forgot to say it because off the unscripted for the most part over here. But this is part of our Badass Boss Girl series, and the
Ooh.
people that we're having on, the guests that we're talking to, are people that I think are doing something really important in the realm of being a boss, regardless of what their gender is, but not losing sight of the fact that like they are still proud to be, in this realm of I'm a woman doing something, exciting, doing something fun, and having a podcast and having some of the conversations that you had, like, definitely like cements your spot in Badass Boss Girl. So
I
thank you
love
for
that.
that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I'm glad I can be a part of the series and be labeled as a badass boss girl. The dream.
but you mentioned this one, and I'm going to change the order of my questions because this one is kind of the slightly more important one. I knew when I started a podcast, I wanted to have 10 episodes done and recorded before I ever launched the podcast, because I didn't want to fall into the trap where most podcasts fail because they can't get consistency off the bat. And I wanted to ask you, because like I said, you 3 years of podcasting, you have over 100 episodes. How did you find that consistency?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it really helped with the fact that I had a YouTube channel first. So for me, consistency was a little bit easier. So I am definitely a planner. I have my own like content calendar that I use to plan out my episodes. One of my favorite apps that I like to use is Notion. It's a great productivity tool. You can use it on your phone. It's also a desktop app, and you can also use it on your web browser, however you want to access it. But it's been really helpful for me to plan out my ideas, to brainstorm ideas. And I like that it has an AI feature to generate things that I may be stuck with. And so for me, I will, in advance, before I have a new season, I will literally write a whole list of episode ideas that I want to do. And I will plan out dates for them. And I will make sure that the week before I want to launch those episodes is that I'll write out my script on what talking points that I want to share. And that's one thing. When it comes to guest episodes and being consistent, it's a lot trickier because you deal with a lot of people who are very unresponsive to pitch emails. Like, I'm actually struggling with this right now. Some people just really suck at following up. It's always annoying when you have to reach out to a person who has a manager, because managers, I don't, this is not gonna sound nice, but sometimes managers can be really snobby, especially when you're a smaller show, because they are gonna think, oh, you don't have enough clout. You're not gonna give my client enough clout, so why should they work with you? And it's like you're missing the fucking point. Like, yes, I'm small, but that doesn't mean I'm worthless, right? And I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of managers out there who work for bigger creators. And I have gotten bigger creators on my show, but that number is small. So I'm always grateful when I can make things like that happen. But when it comes to just being a smaller podcaster in general, it's already humbling being small as is, because people aren't going to take you as seriously, or people are going to think that like you don't have a big enough following for you to resonate with other people. And that's just simply not true. Like, just because my following on Instagram is small, that has zero reflection on my podcast analytics, because I have the access to all of that on the back end. Like, I have the data to back everything up. And I just wish people could stop with the vanity metrics and understand the whole message and the idea behind my actual show and what it means. Like, I'm very particular about who I want on my show, and I try to write a really meaningful pitch tailored to each guest on like what I would love to talk about and how my brand aligns with their brand and what I think that they could bring to the table for my show, like what I can do for them and what they can do for me. Like, I try to make it mutually beneficial. So that can be a little bit harder in terms of consistency. So I may not be as consistent next month with having some guests, but like, I'm working on that. I'm trying, but at least with solo episodes, I'm able to brainstorm and to plan all of that in advance. And I really do have to thank my YouTube channel for that, because if I had not had a YouTube channel, I think it would have been a lot harder. And then the second part is just committing to when I have to record. So Tuesdays are typically my recording days, and then I have to edit right after, and that's how I hold myself accountable, and I schedule that into my day so I can remain consistent.
Yeah, I like that. Me and my co-host, we record on Monday nights. I usually try and get episodes put in so I can listen to them at work on Tuesday, and if I need to make edits or something needs to change, I tend to not edit unless I absolutely have to. I tend to just flow with whatever it is. So like Wednesdays, I try and make my edits while I'm doing my housework, that kind of thing, because it's my day off. But no, I like that way of keeping consistent. I respect anybody that can do scheduling stuff because I cannot. Every time I try and do a schedule, it becomes like a chore, and I'm like, I don't want to do it. So I plan the week ahead, like, oh, we're going to talk about this next week. If I have a guest on, I'm kind of at the mercy of, what that guest wants to talk about or what they do,
Yeah.
and what questions I need to do. And, I try and do a little bit of research on the person so I know, some insightful questions to ask, or questions that like I haven't heard them asked, especially like in a case like where there's so much content out there for what you've done. It's hard to find questions that'll make you say, huh, that's a good question. So if I can make you stop and think, that means that I asked you a question that you probably haven't been asked for. So,
Yeah.
like I know what goes into planning those episodes. So being able to be that consistent, like I said, is really amazing. And the teaching aspect of your podcast, I think, is really, admirable. And that's what I try and do here. And, on that note, what do you hope, people take away, especially like women who listen to you shamelessly unapologetic? Like, what do you think that like your number one hope that they walk away, or I should say, listen away to?
Yeah, I love this question. So, I think one big thing first is I want people to walk away thinking that like I'm not this like entitled bitch who thinks she's above all, cuz people will misconstrue and label unapologetic people as narcissists, and that they're really full of themselves. They act like they're better, and that's quite the opposite. And I've had to like share those disclaimers in some of my shows before. I don't think I'm above anyone at all. I don't think I'm better. I'm just simply saying sometimes I just truly don't give a fuck about what people think of me. And I'm an oversharer, and that can really terrify people. Some people are like, you need to not be oversharing on the internet. You're too much. And it's like, then, well, go find less, because clearly I'm not the show for you, because I am not going to apologize for me being me. So that's the one thing. Like, I really hope people don't take away that the fact that I'm like this narcissistic bitch, because that's not even remotely the case. Like, I absolutely do not identify as a narcissist. I think people also misuse that word completely whenever they deal with somebody who has a lot of confidence and they really know how to radiate that. But in terms of like a positive takeaway, I just hope they feel empowered, and that they can go out into their life and apply that information that they've learned from my show out into the real world. And so it allows them to radiate who they are in their most authentic selves.
Yeah. I think you like that's both of those are like really good wants to have people take away. And I agree with you that like narcissist has become like the buzzword, where it's
Yeah.
like you have any kind of confidence and you're not afraid to say or speak your mind or to have an opinion and back it up. And, you're opinionated, especially if you're, in my opinion, a minority or a woman, you instantly are a narcissist in people's mind. And that's not.
Yeah. Or we're labeled as like a bitch, or we're so bossy, or that we're really aggressive. And it's like, well, if a man says the exact same thing that I do, he's praised for it. And it's just an ugly double standard that I cannot stand. And it's not fair. Like, if I was a man, I'm sure people would probably be listening to my show even more. But listen, I'm not. I'm a woman. And so people are going to label us women as bossy and bitchy and really aggressive. Our tone, oh, don't even get me started about all the tone policers out there. But I am constantly getting tone policed all the time. I made a whole episode on tone policing. I think that came out, I can't remember if it came out in 2021 or last year, but it's there. It's a solo episode. And I just want people to understand, like, it's not okay to tone police people. I think it's a very subjective word. Just say that you're intimidated by women who have strong personalities and you can't handle it. That doesn't mean that they're being terrible or that they have a horrible attitude or tone of voice. I'm just very direct. Like, I'm not sorry.
Yeah. and that, again, shamelessly unapologetic. And that's what I like. I said, that's what I love it. I do remember the episode about about tone, because I can't be loud. Like everybody's always like, be louder, be louder. It's like when I get louder, I just sound angry, and
Yeah.
like I'm you know 6 foot tall. I don't need to sound angry and be like taller than at least 50-60% of the people I'm standing next to. So I tend to try and speak softer so it doesn't come off that way. But I think that tone definitely plays a part. And I think in an audio format like what we do, your tone, like I don't know that I've ever noticed your tone being something that like I would be like, oh man, she's got like tone issues. Like when you get excited about something, I can feel that energy. When you get like,
Yeah.
well, that's kind of stupid, I can hear and feel that, and I generally relate to it. And I think that for what we do, your tone has been perfect. So,
Oh, well,
I think
thank
that's
you. I think a lot of it comes from internal or external misogyny in two ways. A lot of tone policing that I've gotten has actually come on LinkedIn. I'm very vocal on LinkedIn. So I'm a recruiter when I am employed. At the moment I'm currently job searching, and so I do a lot of debunking of like a lot of job search myths out there that a lot of terrible career coaches like to spread. There's a lot of misinformation. And so sometimes I can be very sarcastic and snarky, and I'm very well aware of it. But like that's me being me, because there are a lot of people out there who love what I am saying. They love my demeanor, and it's funny, LinkedIn's probably my largest following, and people really resonate with me speaking up for vulnerable job seekers, or saying what everyone is thinking, but they're too afraid to say it because they're afraid of getting judged. So I do that for them. I like being a voice for people who are too scared to speak up and they have the exact same thoughts and opinions as me. And so people will come and being like, I don't like your tone. I'm like, well, you can't really determine what my tone is through text messages or comments. Like, let's be for real now.
yeah, for sure. That's kind of interesting. Follow-up question on that. Do you list that you're a podcaster on your LinkedIn? I never thought about, like, I don't use LinkedIn often.
I don't. There have been a couple of times on some posts where I've like casually dropped my podcast, but no, I keep my LinkedIn a little bit more separate from my content. If I create content that would be useful for LinkedIn to see, then I absolutely will share it. But yeah, no, I don't say that I'm a podcaster or a content creator unless I feel like it's necessary for me to talk about it.
Yeah, I also am. I do the same thing, but I keep getting flack from like friends about, you should say that you're a podcaster more. You should talk. You should say stuff, and it's like, but that's well, that's a thing. Also, like my professional side of this is also another. So like I tend to keep them separate because I do very much want to have no filter on what I say, not
Yeah.
because I'm afraid of having to answer for it, but because I just don't want to have to deal with it. Like, what we talk about here is absolutely any and everything, and all comers are welcome, no matter what the topic is. So like, I don't want to have to be like, well, it's on my LinkedIn, so I can't talk to these people because then they're gonna, so I try and keep it separate as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, that's just my own decision. And that's exactly like your own personal decision, too. Maybe if I do become a full-time content creator, which is honestly the dream, because let me tell you, I do not like the job market right now. That's a whole nother issue that I'm dealing with. But if it came to me being a full-time content creator, then yeah, I probably would rebrand my LinkedIn. And I would do that with no shame whatsoever. But for now, like, the money that I make from my content is not sustainable enough for me to live financially free. I'm still manifesting for them from that for myself. Never say never. I know it's going to happen. I'm just not there yet. So I obviously have to be very realistic with my expectations. But yeah, when that day comes, I absolutely will rebrand if I have to.
Yeah. I also, again, like the fun of podcast is you segue 50,000 times sometimes, but that's one of the things that I'm getting used to. And I don't, like, I'm a writer. I have a couple books out, and I have a brand as far as that goes. But when you're a writer, your brand is kind of different. It's more passive than active.
Mhm.
Where, as a podcaster, being like the first time I said my brand on air, I was like, oh, that felt weird to say, because I had to have to think about that now, and that is the thing. And when I try and find guests and I try and find what I'm going to do next, I have to think about what my brand is and what I'm saying. Is this going to be thoughtful? Like, one of the things that I refuse to do is anybody that's just selling a product without a story. I don't want to talk to. Like, I'm not going to put my listeners in front of a this is what I made, pay $39.95 to get. Like,
Yeah.
I don't need that. What I want is them to take away something, like why this person made this product in their garage and then found out a way to get it marketed it, and once it picked up, they found a way to get it mass produced. Those are things that, like, that's something that somebody can take away
Yeah.
inspiration from. That's awesome.
Exactly.
um
Exactly. There's so much free information out there, and I am happy to provide that free information. I provide free information to people so they can take things away from, while the platform pays me to do that.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about your accomplishments, like 100 or over 100 episodes, and 3 years running, and what you think is makes a successful episode. So take us back to the beginning. Why a podcast? Like, what was it that felt that you felt compelled to say at that point to, like, make it a podcast?
Yeah. So I love telling this story because it's so funny. So in 2020, during the summer, there was this guy that I was like casually talking to and I had hooked up with, and we were talking about podcasting. And somehow in that conversation, he said that I should create a podcast. And at first I was like, well, I don't know what I would talk about. Like, I already have my YouTube channel. And at the time, my YouTube channel was centered around like navigating life and dating in San Francisco, because that's where I lived. And that was like what my whole niche was. Um, and he was like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, there could be so many things that you could talk about. Like, I would start a podcast with my friends if I could. Like, there could be so many things to talk about." And so it really got me thinking, and I reflected on it. And I was like, you know what? He's got something going here that I could maybe take away. So I thought about it. I had to first come up with a name, and I'm thinking, well, what the fuck would I name my podcast? And so I wanted my podcast to obviously have a purpose, because again, I was struggling with like, well, what the hell would I talk about, right? So I had to like reflect and think about what are some things that are always on my mind that I would love to share that wouldn't necessarily make sense to talk about on my YouTube channel. And so for me, it was about how I started radiating confidence, how I became, you know, more true to myself. And like a lot of those messages would shine through with some of my videos. Like, that was kind of like my why of my YouTube channel. But I thought that I could go deeper and really share more about like my personal journey and my own personal development and how I grew as a person and how I just became the woman that I am today. And I've always called myself as someone who's really unapologetically myself. And so I wanted to use the word unapologetic somewhere in my podcast. So I clearly had to do like a lot of like soul searching and research on like, what could I use that's not taken on the internet? Like, I made sure to look up podcast names on like all platforms so I wasn't stealing somebody's podcast name, because that would not make me feel good if someone did that to me. And so Shamelessly Unapologetic came up. It was not taken. Like, I didn't see any podcast shows named Shamelessly Unapologetic or shows named Shameless and Unapologetic. Like, people weren't using those two words together. And I said, okay, this is what I'm going to name my podcast. And if you type Shamelessly Unapologetic in like a search engine, my podcast is going to be one of the first things that pop up. Like, I have officially have authority over the phrase shamelessly unapologetic. That's what's going to come up when you enter it in a search engine. So if someone wants to try to take my podcast, they will know that my podcast exists. Because if the day that's actually a big fear of mine, is like some large influencer makes a podcast with my podcast name, oh, I'm gonna raise fucking hell. But at the same time, that's how I started the name, and that's how I got started. And then I just had to start planning the episodes and start writing out content ideas, start creating a list of people that I wanted on my show, and that's just sort of how it all came together.
Yeah, I like that story. I like that. I think anybody that started a podcast, I think everybody has that, like, that friend that was like, you should start a podcast way before you actually start it. That's like, I
Yeah.
don't know what I would talk about. And then flash forward however long, and then you have a podcast and you're like, damn, I'm 100 episodes in and I found stuff to talk about. I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And like we had that conversation, I think it was like July or no, just kidding. It was September 2020. I don't know why I said summer. It was really the fall. So, cuz that's when I had like hooked up with him. So September, and then I didn't actually launch it until November 2020.
Yeah. See, and that's, like I said, that's always kind of the way it goes. I thought about this one for probably like a solid 6 months before I like actually decided that I was gonna do it. Um, so we are also pro mental health here, and I've heard you be open about yours. What do you say to women who may feel embarrassed about their own mental health, like to support them?
Ooh, wow. Let's see. How to make women not feel embarrassed about mental health. Well, I would say this can go for any gender, really, because nobody should be embarrassed or feel embarrassed about how they're feeling, because there's that saying, it's okay to not be okay, right? And so I think it's important to process what you're going through, and find people that you can trust to talk about your feelings with, because I think some people get really embarrassed about their mental health is because they may feel like that they're not going to get support, or they don't have the best support system, which means that they should go find a new support system or find more people to hang out with who can support them, and to find people that they can trust. I think that's really important. I mean, I can only say and do so much to help empower people. I think mindset is another thing. I think sometimes you kind of have to push your own boundaries to shift your mindset. And of course, that's way easier said than done. But take one day with a grain of salt, like one step at a time, right? I think that's really important. Recognize your feelings, recognize what you're going through. Reflect on, like, what are you really struggling with? Like, why do you ask yourself, like, why do you feel embarrassed about your mental health? um Ask yourself that, write it down, journal it. I think journaling is such a great way to really reconnect with yourself. I wish more people did it. Therapy is also important. Like, if you can't find somebody to trust, find a therapist that hopefully you can trust to talk about it. But I don't think people should ever feel ashamed of what's going on. I mean, I've definitely experienced shame and embarrassment. I have trichotillomania. So, for those who are listening, that is a mental health hair pulling disorder. And I have created lots of bald spots in the back of my head. And I definitely don't like how it's made me look. It's definitely made me really insecure. But over time, I've gotten comfortable with talking about it. But I'm not going to embrace my bald spots. Like, I do wear hair extensions to cover that up. And it also allows my hair to grow back, and it also helps me not pull because that spot is covered. And when that spot's not covered, I have the tendency to pull it. So I over time I met more people who had the same problem that I had, and it was really nice to connect with those people and talk about trichotillomania. Like, my cousin also has it, so there were so many things that her and I could relate to. So when you find more people who can relate to you in terms of what's going on with you in terms of mental health, I think that's really important. You have to find a good support circle, people that can really resonate with you, and that can really take the blow off from feeling ashamed or embarrassed.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for sharing that story. Actually, I think that, like you said, even if like one person listening is like, oh, I have that same thing, or oh, I feel that same way, like I think that's always what's important. And I think that's why I love, the when you touch on it on your podcast is, you know it could be literally as simple as, one person got the message that they needed to get. I always like to share the story of, like, I go to work really early in the morning, so I'll just scroll social media before I gotta like actually walk out the door. And there
Yeah.
was a content creator. She was kind of feeling down because she wasn't getting likes, people weren't interacting with her, and she was like, I think I'm going to shut this page down. And I've followed her for a while, so I was like, hey, like, from where I'm sitting, like, I think that your content's good, and like I can see people commenting, and it might not be the number you want, but like think of it this way, like you could be the thing that somebody like is waiting to see your post in the morning because you post consistently. So like they're
Yeah.
excited to see that thing that you are doing, and you may not see how impactful that is, but they feel the impact of what you're doing. And she messaged me and was like, hey, like that really meant something, because I never thought of it that way. And to me, I think that you know talking about mental health and speaking about it more openly will make it more open, will make it feel less isolated and alone. And i
Yeah.
i thank you for doing that here, but and on your podcast, because I think that's
Yeah.
huge.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that. And to go back to that girl, I can really resonate with that because when I had my YouTube channel, my first 2 years were really rough. Like, I wasn't growing, my channel didn't have as much direction. And once I was able to refocus my niche, I definitely felt like I had a better message. But I was wondering, like, where are the views? Like, why are people still not seeing this? Like, I have really improved like the quality of my content and my production and editing and all that stuff. I mean, my first videos were horrible, but like you have to start somewhere, right? And so I felt discouraged. Like, I felt like my views were not, getting thousands of views, or sometimes not even being able to break 200 views. It was really mentally taxing, right? And I felt like nobody is watching me, like nobody cares. I feel discouraged, but I had to keep telling myself stay patient because it only takes one video for things to really kick off. And so it wasn't until 2020, like it took a while, but it wasn't until 2020 where I made this video about like how to move across the country for less than $1,000. And that video did really well. I want to say that's like my second most viewed video. My most viewed video is about literally how to navigate public transportation in San Francisco. Quite honestly, the least sexiest topic, but that video I believe has over 50,000 views. And so I'm going to definitely celebrate once it hits 100K because that can be so hard to do on YouTube, especially today with new creators. Like, I started in 2017, and I'm really glad I started when I did because I don't know how my channel would have done if I started now, but who's to say that I would not have found just as much success. So in 2021 I finally hit 1,000 subscribers. I was able to monetize my content, and that was a huge accomplishment that really made me feel more encouraged and empowered. And I said, I'm so glad I stuck with this and I kept staying patient with myself and I kept working at it because it did pay off. It took a lot of time. It took more time than what I wanted to, but it did pay off for me.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. I think it's funny when the silliest videos do that. I have a bunch of different Instagram handles. Like as like when I reached out to you, I was like, I have like, this is the one that I reached out to you on is like my personal one.
Sure.
And I have like my one for this, and then I have one for this thing. And on one of my automotive ones, I posted, I mean, it's like the silliest thing in the world. It's literally making fun of the way that people cut zip ties. So like the little zip ties, people always cut them with a diagonal, so they cut you. And I just made a video and said, this is how the factory cuts zip ties, and it was like a super sharp edge, and I was like, how you should cut zip ties. And like overnight, it was like 10,000 views and like shares, and I was like, what video did I share, thinking I shared somebody else's video or something. And then oh wait, what? And then like it's the first one I've ever had to turn off commenting. And this is, in my opinion, how you've like your video caught traction is when you start getting haters, where people were like, you're cutting them too short, that's not how you should cut them, where'd you get your zip ties, where'd you get. And like I was like, are you really
Oh,
making like, right, are you making fun of this stupid video? Like, clearly this was just a dumb video, but whatever. So it was funny. But we here also, are, like I said, we talk about everything. All comers are welcome. One of the things we talk about here is sex, relationships, and the importance of, judgment free expression.
Let's do.
What what's your what's your opinion, as the woman in front of the microphone, on, female sexuality and being, okay with it, and, women owning their roles in relationships instead of, the 50s ideology?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely anti 50s ideology. So I think everyone should explore sexuality to whatever degree that makes them feel comfortable. For me, my sexual journey has definitely been a very interesting one. I mean, I've always considered myself to be a very sexual person. I mean, I'm a Scorpio, for crying out loud. Like, you're the sign of sex. So I have always loved sex. I personally, for me, I've always found myself being hornier than most of the men that I've gone out with. Like, I've always wanted sex more than they did. And I find that to be kind of problematic. It's like, you should want to like the sex, you should want to be on the same level as me, not me being hungrier for sex than you. Like, they'll have sex with me, but they're so fucking boring about it in bed, and it shows. And I'm like, this isn't working. Like, this is how I know I'm not sexually compatible with someone, because for me, I know what I like, and I know what works for me, and I know what most men like. Of course, every guy's different, and so I'm always willing to take feedback if they don't like something that I do. I'm more than happy to easily listen to the okay, no, thanks for letting me know. I'm glad you told me that. So I won't do that again. Because again, just because one guy does like that, that doesn't mean another guy's gonna like it. But I've just seen a common pattern where usually they like the same thing. But again, you have those instances where they're not going to appreciate that, right? So, um, that's one thing. I think it's really going to vary based off the woman, because everyone's so different. Like, I mean, I really respect those who want to wait until marriage. That's something I would never ever do in a day in my life. Like, I lost my virginity when I was 18, certainly was not married, but I respect those who want to wait. Like, it's not a big deal, but I do think that can come with some consequences on, like, well, what if you are not sexually compatible? What if the sex doesn't get better no matter how hard you work on it? Like, there's always those issues that could arise, but you do you. That's all I'm saying. Like, I don't judge people for their choices and how they want to express their sexuality. I don't judge people who want to make an OnlyFans account. I mean, I used to have one for 6 months. I stopped just because I got burnt out and I lost my creative spark with it. And for me, it just wasn't sustainable in terms of money. I mean, I did make money, but it just wasn't sustainable. So I don't judge people who want to express themselves freely when it comes to sexuality. I just think it's such a subjective thing, and I will support anyone with what they want to do. So that's kind of how I view it.
Yeah. That's I think, a perfect answer. And I think that, you touch on a lot of these topics that we just discussed on your podcast. And I wanted to try and, talk about the range of things that you are discussing, because I think that, somebody can take away something from, every episode that you share, and that your opinions are, probably more common than what people would want to believe. And that's what the unfortunate part is that everybody is, out here thinking I'm the only one. And I know that you've said countless things that I've heard that are, you know, oh dang, somebody else feels that way, or I agree with that. And I think that you do a really good job of saying you might not agree with me, but if you do, that's fine, but these are my
Yeah.
feelings. And I think that's huge. So, you know keep that up, number one. But
They Yeah, I just want people to have healthy relationships. Like, I think some people don't recognize when there are toxic moments in a relationship, especially when it comes to sex and people are not being respected by their partner. I think it is a lot. It can be really hard to walk away from somebody who treats you poorly in a relationship. It really is a lot easier said than done to leave, but sometimes you really do have to take the bullet. But I know there's a lot of situations where it's not as easier for someone who is in a very abusive relationship. And like I feel like I can't really speak to that experience because I've been really thankful to not be in that position. So I don't know what it's like to escape an abusive situation, but I hope that people who are experiencing that can find the right resources and find a way to get out that is going to make them safe. I just am a huge believer in consent and setting boundaries, and I think that also comes with sexual expression and freedom. Um, Also, when I talked about judgment, I don't believe in kink shaming. I don't think that's very fair. Like there are plenty of things that I absolutely am not too fond of. Um, but if that's someone's cup of tea, I'm not going to judge. It's just not going to be for me. But if they want to do it, they should be able to do it without feeling judgment and to do it comfortably.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I can't agree with that more. We don't yuck anybody's yum.
Exactly.
However, we do answer the this or that questions, which is what I got for you now. Are you ready?
Right. Yes, let's do it.
All right. Traveling or staying grounded?
In terms of what? Like staying grounded and traveling. I feel like those two things are so different. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about the context.
So I know that you traveled a little bit, and you like to go on adventures, but also, I from the vibe that I get from you, you also don't mind, hanging out and just being. So, would you rather be traveling, or would you rather just, be hanging out?
I would rather be traveling just because there's still so much of the world that I haven't gone to see. Like, so when I went to the Middle East back in February and early March, so I went to Dubai, I went to Israel for the second time in my life, and then I went to Turkey. I had a long layover in Turkey for 24 hours, so I got to see Istanbul, and I wish I had more time. It was so beautiful. So when I got laid off from Amazon, they were still paying me, even though I was no longer working because it was part of the WARN Act. You have to be notified within 60 days. So I was on their payroll for 60 days. So I was going to take advantage of all the free time with all this free money that I was getting. And I was like, okay, I can actually finally travel for once. Because the past 3 years or 4 years when I was living in San Francisco, I never really got to travel anywhere exciting. Like everything was all domestic. So I actually left the country. Like the last time I had left the country was 2011, and that's when I was in Israel. And so, um, when I went to San Diego back in the end of 2022 in December, San Diego is right by Mexico. So you know what I did? I walked across the border, showed them my passport, walked into Tijuana, and it felt so good to leave the country. I mean, I was only there for like 5 hours. I was like, oh my god, I just can't believe that it took me this long to re-leave the country. And that was because I couldn't do it because from 2010 to 2016, I was in school. I wasn't really making a lot of money. Like I went to Israel for free on a birthright trip, so that's how I did that. But after that, I couldn't travel. My first 2 years in San Francisco, I wasn't making a lot of money. I couldn't afford to travel internationally. 2020 fucked me over financially, couldn't travel. Also, things were closed. Same thing with 2021. Some airports and countries' borders were still not open. So it literally took me until 2022 to like finally leave the country. And then when I had the money for once, guess I could travel finally. Yeah, travel all the way.
All right. Good answer. Next one. Date night or girls night?
Girls' night. All I
I
love
like
my
it.
girls. I mean, I don't go on dates that often. I've given up dating. I haven't been on a dating app since 2021. I deleted them. I just don't put in the effort anymore. Girls' night all the way.
All right. So this one is like podcasting aspirations, big goals. Uh, get the interview, get to interview the guest of your choice, no matter who it is, what they do, like sky's the limit, or get a really good guest that's a surprise. You have no idea who they're going to be. You just know that they're going to be a good guest.
Ooh. I still want to say do the guest of my dreams, because then I get to have a conversation with somebody that I've always wanted to have a conversation on the things that I wanted to talk about them with. Yeah. Like Bretman Rock would be my ultimate dream guest, because he is the unapologetic king. I just recently bought his book, You Are That Bitch. It's called You're That Bitch. I'm still reading it, and it's all about like being unapologetically yourself, and I would love to have him on my show one day and talk about his book.
I like it. Good answers. All right. So wrapping it up, if people wanted to find you, what are some of the ways they can find you besides searching Shamelessly Unapologetic and your ownership of that name? What are some of the other ways?
Totally. So you can find me on YouTube, Ilana Pinsky. So it's spelled Ilana Pinsky. I'm on Instagram, Ilana.Pinsky. TikTok, Ilana Pinsky with 2 Y's. And then, of course, my podcast, Shamelessly Unapologetic, which is on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, and more.
Good. Well, thanks for being here. Hopefully you had some fun. Hopefully, it was a change of pace from being the one conducting all of the interviews to just sit back and be part of the interview.
I know, yeah. I haven't been on a podcast in a while, so I really appreciate you reaching out. I absolutely had so much fun being here. And thank you so much for having me once again. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome. The bell is about to ring. If you want to drop us a voice message or simply ask a question, you can do that by clicking the link in the show notes below. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review. It helps more people find us. Theme music by Kinsey. More music available on Spotify. Remember, every day is a class. Go learn something.